September 12, 1909, Elberfeld, Germany. Chemist Fritz Hofmann opened the sealed metal containers he had filled with methyl isoprene months earlier and heated to various temperatures. Inside, the liquid had transformed to something elastic, not quite natural rubber, but close enough to prove a revolutionary point. Rubber could be synthesized in a laboratory. Hofmann worked for Farbenfabriken von Friedrich Bayer & Co., a dye manufacturer in Elberfeld. His discovery of synthetic rubber came at a time when Germany imported nearly all its rubber from British and Dutch colonies in Southeast Asia. The implications were immediate. If war came, Germany's access to rubber would be cut off within weeks. What Hofmann couldn't have known in 1909 was that his primitive synthetic rubber would evolve over the next 2 decades into Buna, a material that would become critical to Nazi Germany's war machine. By 1944, 98% of all rubber used by the Wehrmacht came from synthetic sources. Without Buna, Germany's mechanized warfare would have ground to a halt years earlier. This is the documented story of how German chemists, driven first by scientific curiosity and later by military desperation, created an entire synthetic rubber industry from coal and limestone, and how that achievement became inseparably linked to one of history's greatest crimes. In 1909, when Fritz Hofmann synthesized his first methyl isoprene rubber, Germany depended entirely on imported natural rubber from British Malaya and Dutch East Indies. These colonies controlled 98% of the world's natural rubber production through vast plantations of Hevea brasiliensis trees. Rubber was essential for modern industry: tires for vehicles, gaskets for engines, insulation for electrical wiring, hoses for every type of fluid transfer. As automobiles and mechanization spread in the early 20th century, rubber consumption exploded. Germany imported approximately 40,000 tons of natural rubber annually by 1914. When World War I began in August 1914, Britain immediately blockaded German ports. Rubber imports ceased. Germany's stockpiles ran out within months. Without rubber, military vehicles couldn't move, aircraft couldn't operate, and industrial production suffered. German chemists scrambled to create substitutes. They produced a primitive synthetic rubber from dimethylbutadiene, but it was inferior to natural rubber, less elastic, prone to hardening in cold weather, and requiring enormous amounts of energy to produce. Germany manufactured approximately 2,500 tons of this methyl rubber during WW1, barely 2% of what was needed. After Germany's defeat in 1918, the rubber problem haunted military planners. Any future conflict would immediately cut off rubber imports again. Germany needed a domestic rubber source, independent of foreign supplies. The decisive breakthrough came from IG Farben, the massive German chemical conglomerate formed in 1925 from the merger of 6 companies, including Bayer, BASF, and Hoechst. IG Farben became the largest chemical company in Europe and 4th largest corporation in the world. In 1929, 2 chemists at IG Farben's Leverkusen laboratory, Walter Bock and Edward Chunkur, successfully synthesized a copolymer of butadiene and styrene. The patent for this butadiene-styrene copolymerization was filed on June 21, 1929. This new synthetic rubber, designated Buna S, represented a genuine breakthrough. The name came from its chemical components: Bu for butadiene, Na for sodium, natrium in German, the original catalyst, and S for styrene. Buna S had properties far superior to WW1-era synthetic rubber. It was elastic, durable, and critically resistant to abrasion. When IG Farben displayed tires made from Buna S at the 1936 Berlin Motor Show, they created a sensation. These tires lasted significantly longer than natural rubber tires under road conditions. The same year, chemists Edward Chunkur, Helmut Kleiner, and Erich Conrad developed Buna N, also called perbanin, a copolymer of butadiene and acrylonitrile. The patent was filed April 26, 1930. Buna N's key property was resistance to oil and petroleum products, essential for gaskets, fuel hoses, and seals in engines. By the mid-1930s, IG Farben had developed synthetic rubber that could genuinely replace natural rubber in most applications. The question shifted from, can we make synthetic rubber, to, can we make enough? When Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933, Nazi economic policy pursued autarky, total national self-sufficiency in strategic materials. Germany would never again be starved into submission by blockade as in WWI. In May 1933, immediately after the Nazi takeover, the Reichswehr, German armed forces, and IG Farben resumed negotiations about Buna production. In November 1933, these talks resulted in a decision to provide state support for Buna production because of its military significance for motorized warfare. In 1936, Hitler appointed Hermann Göring as Commissioner for Raw Materials and Foreign Exchange to implement a 4-year plan preparing Germany's economy for war. Karl Crouch, a member of IG Farben's supervisory board, participated decisively in working out the plan. The 4-year plan set synthetic rubber production targets at 72,000 tons per year from 3 new plants to be built starting in early 1939. This was ambitious. Germany in 1936 had no large-scale Buna production at all. However, IG Farben's board initially resisted rapid expansion. The company wanted to achieve product quality that would make Buna competitive with natural rubber on the world market. Commercial success mattered as much as military preparedness. The breakthrough came when the Nazi government agreed to guarantee operating costs, amortization, and interest payments. In December 1933, IG Farben and the Reich signed the gasoline contract for synthetic fuel, a minimum price and marketing agreement that made otherwise uncompetitive products profitable. A similar arrangement was needed for Buna. In September 1937, IG Farben and the Reich signed the first Buna contract. With sales to the state guaranteed at a set price and after securing a Reich investment credit for 90 million Reichsmarks, IG Farben agreed to build a large-scale production facility. In April 1936, the foundation stone was laid for Bunawerke GmbH Schkopau, near Halle in central Germany. The facility was a subsidiary of Ammoniak Werk Merseburg GmbH, also known as Lunawerke, which belonged to IG Farben. Production of synthetic rubber commenced at Schkopau in March 1937. The factory was booking profits by spring 1939. In late April 1938, parties agreed to build a Buna II factory with annual capacity of 15,000 tons. The production process was complex. Buna required 4 stages of chemical processing, polymerization of butadiene mixed with styrene in emulsion. The raw material acetylene needed for Buna production came from coal through the arcing process. Acetylene was converted to butadiene, the main starting material for synthetic rubber. By 1939, a second factory, Hulswerke in Marl, started Buna rubber production. Germany now had industrial-scale synthetic rubber capacity independent of foreign imports. The timing proved critical. When World War II began on September 1, 1939, Germany's dependence on imported natural rubber ranged between 80 and 90% according to various estimates. British and French naval forces immediately blockaded German ports. Within months, natural rubber imports ceased. But unlike WW1, Germany now had functioning synthetic rubber plants. Buna production ramped up rapidly as war demands intensified. As the war progressed, Germany's synthetic rubber production increased dramatically while natural rubber became almost unavailable. By 1944, only 2% of rubber used in Germany was natural. The rest was Buna. The Wehrmacht's supply, transport, and combat vehicles relied entirely on Buna production for tires and track cushioning. Every tank, truck, aircraft, and piece of equipment required rubber components. Without Buna, Germany's mechanized forces would have been immobilized. After Wehrmacht victories in Poland and Western Europe, planned targets for Buna production increased further. In fall 1940, IG Farben assumed that 120,000 to 150,000 tons per year of Buna production would be required to meet total rubber requirements of 300,000 tons annually in the Central European Economic Region, Nazi terminology for occupied Europe under German control. Production capacities at war's start, however, fell far short of targets. The Schkopau plant operated, and Hools had begun production, but reaching the ambitious goals required massive expansion. This created the context for IG Farben's most notorious decision, building a Buna plant at Auschwitz. In February 1941, Reichsfuhrer SS Heinrich Himmler signed an order supporting construction of an IG Farben Buna N synthetic rubber plant near the Monowitz concentration camp, part of the Auschwitz complex in German-occupied Poland. The location choice involved intense debate between IG Farben and Reich government. The goal was to perfect all developments in catalytic high-pressure chemistry. As IG Farben director Otto Ambros stated at the 6th meeting of the Rubber Commission, the company adopted Reich Planning's endeavor to achieve a stronger industrial opening of the East. With major synthetics production dependent on coal more than ever, locating the plant near Upper Silesian coal mines made industrial sense. The availability of massive forced labor at Auschwitz made it economically attractive under Nazi logic. Starting in 1941, IG Farben built a chemical factory in the immediate vicinity of Auschwitz concentration camp to produce Buna. Construction employed German workers alongside thousands of prisoners from Auschwitz. An estimated 35,000 to 50,000 people died on the forced labor details for Buna production in concentration camp conditions. Jewish prisoners, Soviet POWs, Polish political prisoners, and other inmates were worked to death building the plant. The Monowitz Buna facility, also called Auschwitz III, became one of the largest subcamps of Auschwitz. A private prison camp was built on factory grounds to house laborers. Prisoners worked 12-hour shifts with minimal food, beaten by SS guards and civilian overseers. Those too weak to work were sent to the gas chambers at Auschwitz II-Birkenau. IG Farben paid the SS for each prisoner supplied, 3 to 4 Reichsmarks per day for unskilled labor, more for skilled workers. The company calculated that average prisoner lifespan before death from exhaustion, disease, or murder was 3 months. Despite massive investment and brutal exploitation, the Monowitz Buna plant never produced rubber during its wartime existence. Technical difficulties, Allied bombing, and the chaos of Germany's collapse meant the facility remained incomplete when Soviet forces liberated Auschwitz on January 27, 1945. Even as Germany built its synthetic rubber industry with slave labor, the technology itself spread to other nations, including Germany's enemies. Before the war, IG Farben had partnerships with American companies. In particular, IG Farben and Standard Oil Company of New Jersey, now Exxon, had agreed to share knowledge on petroleum products, including synthetic rubber. This gave American companies access to German Buna technology prior to World War II. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, and seized British Malaya and Dutch East Indies, the United States suddenly faced the same rubber crisis Germany had confronted in World War I. Japan controlled 90% of world rubber production and immediately cut off exports to America. President Franklin Roosevelt, calling rubber a strategic and critical material, created the Rubber Reserve Company in 1940 to stockpile natural rubber and regulate synthetic rubber production. Using German Buna technology as a foundation, American companies developed their own synthetic rubber. Standard Oil, working with IG Farben data, reformulated Buna rubber into butyl rubber, which held air 13 times better than natural rubber. The United States developed GRS, government rubber styrene, essentially identical to German Buna S, a copolymer of 75% butadiene and 25% styrene. Production exploded. In 1940, only 0.4% of rubber used by American companies was synthetic. By 1942, under massive government stimulus, the synthetic rubber industry grew from 4 plants, controlled by B.F. Goodrich, Goodyear, Firestone, and U.S. Rubber, to 51 plants operated by various chemical, oil, and rubber companies. Production increased from 3,721 tons in 1942 to 756,042 tons by 1945. One type of synthetic rubber production jumped from 8,000 long tons in 1941 to 495,000 long tons in 1944. By war's end, America was producing more synthetic rubber than Germany, using the same basic technology German chemists had invented, but with free labor instead of slaves. After Germany's defeat in May 1945, Allied forces seized IG Farben facilities. The scale of the company's involvement in Nazi crimes became clear as investigators documented the Monowitz-Buna operation. 24 IG Farben executives were indicted for war crimes in the subsequent Nuremberg trials. The charges included slavery, mass murder, and crimes against humanity related to forced labor at Auschwitz and other locations. In 1978, Joseph Borken, who investigated the company as a United States Justice Department lawyer, quoted an American report. Without IG's immense productive facilities, its far-reaching research, varied technical expertise, and overall concentration of economic power, Germany would not have been in a position to start its aggressive war in September 1939. By 1943, IG Farben was manufacturing products worth 3 billion marks in 334 facilities in occupied Europe. Almost half its workforce of 330,000 consisted of slave labor or conscripts, including 30,000 Auschwitz prisoners. Annual net profit was around 500 million Reichsmarks. In 1945, IG Farben manufactured all synthetic rubber and methanol in Germany, 90% of its plastic and organic intermediates, 84% of its explosives, 75% of its nitrogen and solvents, around 50% of its pharmaceuticals, and around 33% of its synthetic fuel. Staff of the Bayer Group at IG Farben conducted medical experiments on concentration camp inmates at Auschwitz and Mauthausen. At Auschwitz, they were led by Bayer employee Helmut Vetter, an Auschwitz camp physician and SS captain. The Nuremberg verdict found 13 defendants guilty. Sentences ranged from 1 to 8 years imprisonment. Many considered the sentences too lenient given the scale of crimes. Several convicted executives returned to positions of influence in German chemical industry after their release. IG Farben was dissolved by Allied order. Its constituent companies, Bayer, BASF, Hoechst, Agfa, Casella, and others were re-established as separate entities. Parts in East Germany were nationalized. Despite its association with Nazi crimes, Buna technology itself proved valuable and enduring. Synthetic rubber production continued worldwide after 1945. Under Soviet administration, Buna Werkskopau were expropriated and became part of Sowjetische Aktiengesellschaft Kautschuk to cover Soviet reparation demands. They were later transferred into publicly owned corporation VEB Chemische Werke Buna. The facility's slogan, Plaste und Elaste aus Skopau, referred to its main products. With about 18,000 employees, Buna Werk became one of the 5 largest industrial combines in East Germany. In West Germany, production of Buna was initially prohibited by British occupation authorities in 1948. It was not authorized again until the early 1950s as a result of the Korean War, when supplies of natural rubber were jeopardized by military conflict in the Far East. In 1955, together with Bayer AG, Höchst AG, and BASF AG, Höchst established a subsidiary for synthetic rubber production, Buna Werk Höchst GmbH. A wider product range developed from the original Buna production for the tire industry. By 1950, use of synthetic rubber worldwide outpaced natural rubber. Today, more than 70% of rubber production utilizes synthetic rubber. Styrene butadiene rubber, essentially Buna S, remains one of the most important materials in tire manufacturing. In 2021, the Schkopau synthetic rubber production plant was purchased by Polish chemical company Synthos. The facility continues operating, now producing rubber for civilian markets using the same basic chemical processes invented in the 1920s. The history of Buna reveals an uncomfortable truth about technological innovation. Brilliant science can serve evil purposes. Walter Bach and Eduard Chunker, who invented Buna S in 1929, were genuine innovators solving a real scientific problem. Their copolymerization process represented legitimate chemical engineering achievement. Fritz Hofmann's 1909 discovery had laid groundwork for an entire industry. But when that innovation was harnessed to Nazi Germany's war machine, maintained through slave labor and produced in a factory where inmates were worked to death, the achievement became inseparable from atrocity. IG Farben executives claimed after the war that they were merely businessmen manufacturing products. Otto Ambros, who selected the Auschwitz location for the Buna plant, testified that the company had no choice but to use forced labor. The SS controlled labor allocation in occupied territories. The Nuremberg court rejected these defenses. Choosing to build at Auschwitz, negotiating prices per prisoner with the SS, working inmates to death while extracting profit, these were conscious decisions, not inevitable consequences of wartime conditions. German chemical journals after World War II largely avoided mentioning Auschwitz when discussing Buna history. Industrial publications from Bayer AG, Hulls AG, and later Lanxess AG, the current corporate descendant, initially did not include the word Auschwitz in their synthetic rubber histories. In recent decades, this has changed. In 2022, a clear step toward a fundamentally new culture of remembrance became evident when Bayer AG openly addressed its Nazi past through a history project. This included establishing a memorial site for 16,000 forced laborers at former IG Farben sites and supporting an exhibition on IG Farben and Buna Monowitz. Germany's synthetic rubber program achieved its strategic goal. Buna production allowed Nazi Germany to wage mechanized war for 6 years, despite complete loss of natural rubber sources. Without Buna, Wehrmacht vehicles would have been immobilized, Luftwaffe aircraft grounded, and German industry paralyzed years earlier. The technology was genuine achievement. German chemists solved a problem that had defeated scientists for decades. They created a material competitive with nature's product using only coal, water, and chemistry. But the achievement came at an unspeakable price. Tens of thousands died to build Buna factories. The technology that enabled Germany's war effort was produced through industrialized murder. Today, when you drive on tires containing synthetic rubber, and almost all tires do, you're using a material whose development is inextricably linked to both scientific brilliance and historical horror. The name Buna itself largely disappeared from commercial use after the war, replaced with terms like SBR, styrene butadiene rubber. But the chemical process invented by Bach and Chunker in 1929 remains fundamentally unchanged. Modern synthetic rubber is their innovation, refined and improved, but based on the same copolymerization they discovered. Germany lost all rubber sources in 1939. Chemists invented Buna to save the Wehrmacht. The invention worked, and that success prolonged a war that killed tens of millions. That paradox defines the Buna story, a triumph of chemistry that enabled a catastrophe of history.